So we know a lot of you guys are starting your own businesses, and one of the most important things is having a really awesome website. So today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. So if you stick around to the end, we'll tell you all about this amazing service and how it can really help you.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the vlog. I need to take a quick second and let you know that time is running out on our 335i sweepstakes car. If you haven't already got your entries in, I suggest you do so today. Head over to throtl.com, grab some merch, grab some car parts if you've been looking for a particular car part. Every $5 you spend on any of that stuff gives you one entry into winning the car. And if you are signed up as a VIP member or want to go sign up to be VIP, you get 3 entries for every $5 you spend, and that increases your chance immensely to win this car. Head on over to the site, get entered, don't miss out. And now let's go check on the EK. As you guys saw in the last video, we got our K20 with our F20C intake manifold and transmission placed in the bay. We need to raise this motor about 4 or 5 inches, as I mentioned in the previous video. I've got a special guest with me today. I got Big Jeff in the house. He's over here working on the seam sealer material, pulling that out of the car as much as possible. We've got a lot of it here. We've got a bunch down here. We're not gonna go overboard. I wanna be clear. This is purpose-built track style car, so we're not gonna go overboard with the engine-based shaving stuff, but we are gonna go to the extent of cleaning the bay up and getting rid of any holes that we don't need so that we're not allowing any water or moisture into the cockpit of the car. We're gonna use the ODB Welding Works kit to accomplish those goals, and we think it's a great product for not only show cars but also for building up a race car chassis. So we're gonna go ahead and get started on those projects. I'm gonna start cutting this tunnel a little bigger so we can get this engine raised up, and then when Ricky gets here, we'll go over some more things. So stay tuned. All right, so Big Jeff's making some pretty good headway. This isn't finished product, but this is basically what it looks like when all of the material is removed. And we'll go back with a grinder disc and grind all this down nice and smooth, and then we can start putting in our ODB Welding Works plates to clean up the bay as much as possible. But I had to take a quick break. Evan just came out here. Santa Claus came today. Looks like some products that we ordered from Hybrid Racing have arrived. So we've partnered with them to run some of the products. You know, they're obviously known for their front wheel drive stuff and all wheel drive stuff, but this will be one of the first projects that they're helping with for a rear wheel drive setup. So we're gonna go ahead and crack into these boxes and see what they sent along for us to try out. Okay, so two of the things that the guys at Hybrid sent over was their oil cap and their dipstick. And as I was saying, a lot of times when you put these engines in the front wheel drive configuration, this is the front of the engine. And what happens is when the hood comes down, these become a clearance issue. Some of the cars, especially the EF chassis and stuff, is a really tight clearance here. So you have to get rid of these parts in order to clear the hood or to make things easier. Hybrid Racing solved that problem by making a slim line of oil caps and a dipstick. So basically this goes in like this, really nice and easy, and you just flip down the cap, and all of a sudden now you've got pretty much a flush situation in the front of the engine. It's a lot nicer looking than this cap, and it's aluminum, so it's a really nice part to boot. The amount of engineering that went into that's actually quite impressive. So here's the stock oil level dipstick, and we have the slim lock from Hybrid, same length. And what's cool is this one actually sits First of all, one thing I noticed was how snug the rubber grommet is that goes in, which means it's going to sit in there really nice and tight. And then once you push this down, it's pretty much locked into place, and now you just have this nice smooth look. So any clearance, hood clearance issues you may have had are now gone, but I think overall just the aesthetic of that is so much nicer than this old piece of crap. All right, well, I want to give a huge shout out to Hybrid Racing for taking care of us on all of these bits for this car. If you guys are doing a swap, or if you have a Honda project at home, give Hybrid Racing a shot. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And stay tuned as we install these things in future videos, and we'll show you guys how it all works. Alright, well, as you guys saw, I went ahead and cut up a little further. We've now got full clearance on the tunnel. I've got it basically smack against right there, which we can take another ½ inch out of there if we need to. We need to make sure that we've got room all the way around so that this thing can rock in place and not hit. Right there looks pretty good. Now, one thing we are starting to see is, as you can see here, this is starting to get up above the height of our tunnel. So we're gonna have to address this later, but for now we know this is where we need to be, because underneath the car, I'll just hop under here real quick, excuse me, Pop. As you guys can see, we are now pretty flat with the frame rails. I'll use my old hockey stick here to show you guys. We want to be up tucked in between these rails here. These are welded in, basically skid rails, strengthening supports underneath the car. And it's hard to see from the angle that I'm at, but we're pretty much tucked up in between the rails, which is great. We may want to put just a ½ inch steel bar or something across the bottom here, and then we can actually make like a flat bottom plate or something like that that'll bolt in, but we're looking pretty good here. One thing that we're gonna tackle very soon, and that I'm already thinking about because it's probably the biggest hurdle that we have to overcome, is the steering rack placement. And this motor is really tall, the oil pan is really tall, and there's really nowhere to squeak a steering rack underneath it or through it without making major modifications to the oil pan. So one thing, as I said earlier, a lot of people use an S13 or S14 front subframe with the tension rods and all that stuff to accomplish the steering and the suspension up front. I don't want to do that. I know it's a harder route that I want to take, but I think it'll be way more unique and much cooler to tackle these issues on our own and figure out a way around all these things. I think the S13 subframe route is smart because you're using something that already exists, but I don't want to discount the fact that this car has double wishbone suspension, which is very desirable for track cars, and I think any car that can have double wishbone suspension should. So I would like to try to retain that as much as possible. So we're trying to keep the stock double wishbone suspension on this car, utilizing the factory componentry and modifying it, or finding a way to utilize it in this rear wheel drive format. So it's gonna get real interesting how we tackle this, guys, and I hope you guys see my vision and why I'm trying to do this and the reasonings behind it. I'm sure a lot of you have very strong opinions on why we shouldn't do that. But again, this is my build, and you know, I want to build it the way I want to build it. So this is partially a you know, fabrication challenge and sort of an engineering type challenge that I think is fun, and I want to see it through. So I hope you guys are down to follow along. But next is figuring out our engine mount situation, our tunnel situation, and a lot of other potential, I guess, I don't know what to call them, issues or challenges that we need to surmount. So we're gonna keep moving on.
The next day.
Okay guys, well, fast forward a little bit. We spent the latter half of yesterday actually putting the front K-member back in the car, and we put only portions of it back in. As you guys can see, it is not pretty. But what we did was we actually chopped out the center section of the K-member so that we could get our pickup points for our suspension back in place. Because I want to retain the factory double wishbone suspension, this K-member is integral to allowing us to remember or know where our pickup points are for the suspension. And with the K-member in and the lower control arms fully intact, we realized that there is absolutely no way to run a steering rack in this car without getting really crafty. And as much as I don't mind getting crafty, I would rather not, like, keep it simple if we can, as the old saying goes. So what we found since yesterday, basically, and what I've slept on, is that my friend John actually mentioned to me, hey, those lower control arms are 2 pieces. I didn't even realize that the front lower control arms actually bolt together, which is pretty cool. So this basically becomes the pivot point for the front suspension, as it bolts to the front arm here, and then it pivots here on the chassis mount of the K-member. So what we've done is we've removed that, and by not having this on the car, essentially this is now not stable, meaning it has no support system to keep it where it needs to be. So that leads us to, okay, that's fine. We can make our own portion of that and add a Heim joint at the back side so we can dial in caster for this thing, as it's now going to be rear-wheel drive. We would like to have some caster adjustment, which it didn't have before. So that's a good solution for us. But now we see that this bar is in the way for the steering rack, and also the rear portion of the engine here is all in the way of the steering rack and the K-member that we're going to have to make. So essentially what we're going to do is, instead of taking the shortcut route and using something from another car, we're actually going to build our own box steel K-member that's going to bolt in. It's going to pick up all these suspension points that we have here for support, and probably reach up to these 2 bolt holes here under the frame rail to triangulate the whole system, and then we'll run a beam left to right across the front for support, and that will give us the ability to mount our steering rack and other components that we're going to need to put back in place once this goes back together. So it looks like a mess right now, and this required a lot of thought and thinking, and thankfully I have some pretty smart friends that were willing to offer some advice as well. So we've kind of taken the best of all that advice, and we're gonna go ahead and apply it. So I guess the first thing to do now is to get the oil pan off and get it cut, and find out what type of clearance we need to make for our K-member. All right, so the pan is out, and we're gonna go ahead and just get this thing cleaned up a little bit. This pan, for all intents and purposes, is gonna be a sacrificial oil pan, because we're gonna use this aluminum pan as our sort of donor pan that we're gonna cut up. We're gonna go ahead and make our cross member that goes underneath this, and we're gonna use this pan as sort of our mock-up. And then I've already ordered a steel oil pan, which is gonna be used for multiple purposes. We went with the steel pan because it is more durable than the aluminum pan if we were to bottom out this engine going over curbing or something like that. The steel pan will dent, where this pan will crack and break. This pan is more expensive. The steel pan's $100 versus $300 or $350 for the aluminum pan. All the research I've done says that the steel pan is better. And also John mentioned to me that when we weld this pan up, because we are going to have to section some of it out and close it back up, that the steel pan will weld nicer than this aluminum, which has a tendency to warp. I've got a day or so to wait on that other pan. This one will do just perfect for us right now. We'll cut it up, and then that way once the steel pan gets here, we've got a template and we can cut and weld that thing straight away. We've had this Eastwood parts washing cabinet deal for, I don't know, 6 months now, and it's never been used. Big Jeff took some time this morning, got her all fired up, and going ahead and getting this sacrificial oil pan cleaned up so that when we're toying around with it this afternoon, we don't get our hands all dirty. becoming soft around here. But anyway, there's quite a bit of oil caked up on here from the previous car this was in. So we're gonna go ahead and Big Jeff's gonna go ahead and actually get this degreased for us so that we can start cutting into it. Huge shout out to Eastwood Products. If you guys need shop tools for your home garage or your shop, look them up online. Eastwood Products, the link's down below. They've got some awesome stuff, and it's quite affordable. Okay guys, so that's about the area that we're gonna cut out of this pan. And what that's gonna allow us to do is slip our new K-member cross beam across underneath the engine and also the steering rack. I went ahead and measured the steering rack width. And basically we wanna make sure we have enough room for that, plus our K-member cross beam. Right now I'm gonna be cutting out about 6 inches in length out from this pan. If we feel like it's a detrimental amount of oil, we'll end up adding some wings to the pan or an area to add some capacity, but from what I can see here, this doesn't look too crazy. This area of the pan that we're cutting out of here doesn't even really hold oil, it's just basically a catch. So we're actually in pretty good shape. Just gotta get this cut and see where we're at. We might have to take a little more. All right, well, as you guys saw, we were able to notch out this oil pan. It's a pretty big notch. Looks a little bigger on camera than it actually is. It's only 6 inches
That's what she said.
in depth, but I think it will be a good opportunity now for us to sort of see where our steering rack and our K-member can pass underneath the engine with this cutout. And yeah, we're gonna go ahead and bolt this up to the back underneath the engine and see if we can get this thing back in the car.
One eternity later.
We put the transmission and our JSP adapter plate back on, got it back in the car as you guys can see here. And now we can actually take a look and see what we're dealing with from a steering rack and K-member issue underneath the car. And we're actually in pretty good shape. So I'm not sure how much of this you guys will actually be able to see, but this is our cut in our oil pan right here. And this bar that's directly in the way, that's gonna go away, so don't worry about that. You have to visually understand that we have the steering arm here on our knuckle, and that's gonna run straight through where that bar is, which is gonna get deleted because we're gonna build our own subframe or K-member. And the steering rack is gonna pass right under the engine to the other side. And that also leaves us a heap of room under there to run the K-member, which I just put a piece of square steel in here just so you guys can see the amount of room that we have to play with now in front to build our K-member, which is also going to house the pickup point for this suspension arm here. And then it's also going to probably get triangulated up to the bottom of the frame rail here, down to here, and then our motor mounts will come off of this K-member up to here. So now that we have our aluminum oil pan cut, we can now transfer those measurements over to the steel pan when it gets here. I'm not sure yet, but I think what I'm gonna do is just make weld a rod onto here and rod onto the bottom of the frame rail so that stays. That way I can get rid of all this crap. That stays where it needs to be, and then we can build off of that basically. But that's the thought, and we're gonna go ahead and just start sort of messing with that. There's gonna be a lot of trial and error that goes along with this. But man, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I think we're gonna be able to keep our Honda original double wishbone suspension.
A little later.
All right, guys, well, instead of actually welding in a brace like I mentioned we might do, went ahead and just whipped up a quick angle bracket out of aluminum, and I went ahead and basically bolted this into place to hold the lower control arm in its position. Now I can remove this old piece of K-member, and that arm will stay where it's supposed to be and keep the proper geometry. That way I can figure out how to connect it to the K-member and it'll be in its original location.
1 hour later.
All right, well, fast forward about an hour, and we've got some things in place. I went ahead and cut a 5-inch section of 1/2-inch steel plate, and I've matched the angle of the lower control arm, as you can see here. What we're gonna do is we're actually gonna use some 2x2 material to go underneath the engine through the hole that we cut this morning. And basically this is gonna capture the end of the lower control arm. We'll cut it just so that we can do a through bolt through it, and this will go around that, holding it in place and anchoring it from moving. And then we will drop down from here off the bottom of this plate back behind this arm to our cross beam that's going to go this way. And at that point, once we have those built, we can build our motor mount provision here, and then we can move on to making our lower caster arm that's going to go down there, and then we will build the steering rack off of this 2x2 steel here. So I'm going to call it a day with this for today. This is a lot of brain work and figuring out how to do things. I'm sorry it's a little bit dry, but these are the things that you have to do to fabricate things on a car that don't sit on a shelf. So my buddy at JSP Fab, John, said, you're learning the difference between being a car builder and being a car fabricator, and I think that rings very true. So shout out to all those car fabricators out there. It's a lot different than just bolting stuff on. So it's a great learning process for me. I've never actually led a build like this before. I've been parts of builds like this, but I've always had talented fabricators around me like John and Eric and others. So I've been lucky, but now it's my time to learn. I think Evan and I are gonna tackle a lot of this ourselves, which is awesome. So yeah, now we move on. I'm gonna call it a night. We're gonna go over to Industrial Metal Supply tomorrow and pick up the appropriate materials, and we'll be back cutting and grinding and welding tomorrow. So stay tuned. We've got a lot more great content coming up for you guys. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for all the likes, comments. We appreciate it. Turn on those notifications, guys. And if you don't remember, guys, the 335i sweepstakes car is going to be getting raffled off any day now. If you haven't already got your entries in, head on over to throtl.com, buy some merch, buy that car part you've been saving for. Every $5 you spend gets you an entry to win it. If you're a VIP member, every $5 gets you 3 entries to win it. Head on over to the site, get those things now before this thing ends. I hope you win the car. We'll see you next time.
So thank you guys so much for watching today's YouTube video. Before we go, we have to talk to you about our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a professional website, online store, or portfolio. So one of the really awesome features of Squarespace that I like the most is how extensive the template library is. So if you start from scratch with a website, it can be very, very challenging, and Squarespace has really tackled this problem and created this template library that makes it so much easier and so much faster to create your own website by yourself. So they even have email campaigns where you can grow and engage your audience, create powerful emails with content, and run promotions and sales through the email system. And you can even introduce your audience to blog posts or new products that are coming out in the near future. One other really cool feature that I like about Squarespace is the analytics. So the analytics of Squarespace are really strong. They allow you to really look into what your demographics are, how long people are spending on your website, which areas need improvement, and how you can really have an overall better experience for your end customer or end user. So one of the other really cool notable features of Squarespace is the ability to add an event calendar. So if you go to a lot of different events or you host events, adding a calendar to your website allows you to let your audience know where you're gonna be, when you're gonna be there, and the address of where you're going. So guys, if any of you are watching this are interested in starting your own website, or if you just wanna learn more, check out the top link in the video description and use code throtl when you check out. You'll save 10% off your first purchase of a website and domain. Good luck, guys. Can't wait to see what you come up with, and a huge thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video.